Hello, dear viewers, and welcome back to Sci-Fi Stories. Unfortunately, YouTube has recently demonetized our channel, leaving us without the budget to keep our operations running. If you enjoy today's story, please consider supporting us with just $1 so we can pay our hardworking team to cover their living expenses and continue bringing you these incredible tales. You can donate by scanning the QR code on your screen or by clicking the link in the video description and pinned comment. The air on Eden 9 always tasted like fresh rain and crushed mint. It was an absolute masterpiece of atmospheric engineering. A lush, vibrant sanctuary suspended in the cold, unforgiving void of space. Cash Boggs, a xenoflora engineer of the highest order, stood at the edge of the great terraced valleys, inhaling the rich oxygen that his people had painstakingly cultivated. Eden 9 was not just another colonized planet. It was the beating green heart of the sector, a fiercely neutral agricultural haven that pumped vital sustenance and purified atmosphere to 30 different solar systems. The canopy above him was a breathtaking tapestry of bioluminescent flora, a shimmering testament to humanity's absolute mastery over life itself. Then, the sky shattered. There was no warning, no formal declaration of hostility, and no demand for surrender. The pristine clouds simply tore open as the massive, angular shadows of the Vangari Empire fleet plunged brutally through the upper atmosphere. The Vangari were a species forged in the relentless fires of endless conquest, an arrogant race that viewed the universe as a vast territory waiting to be subjugated by force. Their dreadnoughts, cold and jagged like obsidian daggers, violently blotted out the artificial sun of Eden 9. The deafening roar of their thrusters stripped the delicate leaves from the ancient trees, replacing the tranquil hum of nature with the oppressive, suffocating weight of an unprovoked invasion. Across global frequencies, a harsh, metallic voice declared the immediate annexation of all human agricultural worlds. The invasion was a blatant desecration of the oldest galactic treaties. But Commander Kylan of the Vangari Vanguard cared absolutely nothing for the fragile concepts of neutrality. Standing on the bridge of his command ship, Kylan ordered his gunners to aim their primary plasma batteries directly at the center of the valley. Their target was the core flora, known to the colonists as the World Tree. It was an astonishing biological marvel, a towering monument of genetic perfection that humanity had spent 100 years meticulously crossbreeding and nurturing. The World Tree stabilized the planetary mantle and regulated the weather patterns, acting as a massive anchor of life, towering miles into the sky. The plasma cannons fired. Beams of blinding, superheated energy struck the great trunk. The air instantly ignited, turning the breathable atmosphere into a searing furnace. Cash watched in agonizing silence as the World Tree, representing a century of human devotion and brilliance, was consumed in an apocalyptic inferno. The vital sap boiled instantly. The immense branches splintered with a sound like dying thunder, and millions of glowing leaves turned to black ash in a fraction of a second. The violent contrast between the elegant, nurturing greenery of the planet and the sterile, destructive fire of the Vangari weapons created a stifling, terrifying stillness beneath the deafening roar of the flames. Not satisfied with mere environmental slaughter, Commander Kylan descended to the surface of the planet. Accompanied by a legion of heavily armored shock troops, he dragged the bruised and battered planetary governor before the visual broadcasters, aggressively hijacking every communication channel across the galaxy. The broadcast beamed into billions of homes, ships, and outposts. "Look at your pathetic leaders," Kylan sneered, his voice dripping with venomous contempt as he stared directly into the recording drones. "You humans have grown soft in the dirt. You are nothing but weak gardeners, so obsessed with planting seeds and tending to weeds that you have forgotten how to hold a weapon. You belong on your knees, harvesting crops for those who truly possess the strength to rule." With a casual, brutal motion, Kylan raised his sidearm and executed the governor on live galactic television. The sharp, terrifying sound of the gunshot echoed across the silent, burning valley. Less than 100 yards away, Cashbog stood completely still amidst the falling rain of gray ash. The remains of the world tree drifted down around him like snow, coating his uniform, his hair, and his bare hands. The air, once sweet with mint, now choked with the bitter, toxic stench of ozone and burnt carbon. The surviving colonists were weeping in the dirt around him, terrified and broken by the sudden violence. But Cash did not scream. He did not drop to his knees, and he did not turn to run. Instead, as he looked at the Vangari soldiers celebrating their hollow victory, Cash merely smiled. It was a subtle, half-formed expression, completely devoid of fear or panic. It was a smile of profound, chilling pity. Slowly, deliberately, Cash reached into the breast pocket of his specialized suit. His fingers closed around a bioseed device, a small, unassuming object, no larger than the tip of his finger. It was not a weapon in any conventional sense. It held no explosive charge, no kinetic payload. He held it up to the dimming light, letting the ash settle on its smooth metallic surface. And then he closed his fist. With a sharp snap, he crushed the device into dust. The action triggered no blaring war sirens. There were no klaxons echoing across the human colonies. No frantic calls for military mobilization or retaliation. Instead, as the invisible signal pulsed outward, tying into the deep space biological network that humanity had secretly woven across the stars, every single human communication channel simply went dark. A heavy, absolute silence fell over the human network. It was the quiet of a predator, the terrible, breathless stillness that descends upon a forest just before the trap snaps shut. For exactly 3 weeks, following the devastation of Eden 9, the Vangari Armada held a rigid defensive perimeter. Thousands of obsidian dreadnoughts formed a lethal blockade around their stolen agricultural prize, their weapons primed and their shields operating at maximum capacity. They waited with eager anticipation for the inevitable retaliation from Earth. Tactical analysts monitored every hyperspace lane, tracking the deep void for the signature energy spikes of a human invasion fleet. But the scanners remained utterly empty. Not a single human warship materialized. The vast human military complex, rumored to be hidden in the dark sectors, simply did not respond. The silence was maddening to a warrior race, a strategic vacuum that defied all Vangari military doctrine. The first sign of the counterattack did not register on tactical radars or orbital defense grids. It appeared as a minor statistical anomaly on an atmospheric telemetry readout. Across 40 of the Vangari core worlds, the engineered microalgae suspended in the upper atmosphere began to behave erratically. This biological filtration system, purchased from human planetary engineers decades prior, had functioned flawlessly for generations. These microscopic organisms had bathed the Vangari skies in a vibrant blue hue, silently converting industrial carbon emissions into breathable air. But under the cover of a single planetary night cycle, the blue canopy turned a sickly, necrotic ash-gray. By the time the morning suns rose over the Vangari capital, biological sensors triggered global alarms. The optimal oxygen saturation levels in the atmosphere had plummeted by precisely 40%. Panic, cold and clinical, began to seep into the lower echelons of the scientific ministries. The atmospheric degradation was only the beginning of a cascading systemic failure. Within hours of the oxygen drop, planetary agricultural sectors reported catastrophic crop failures. The bioengineered survival mushrooms and nutrient-rich flora, which formed the absolute bedrock of the Vangari food supply, withered in their massive hydroponic bays. Yields dropped by a staggering 90% in a matter of days. Desperate agricultural directors flooded the fields with synthetic nutrient solutions, but the seeds simply refused to sprout. They lay completely dormant in the soil like tiny, dead stones. Even the biological water purification networks, entirely reliant on symbiotic root systems, stagnated and turned toxic. The planetary supply chains were freezing, not from a physical blockade, but from a fundamental breakdown of the biological machinery. Deep inside the sterile confines of the Imperial Xenobiology Institute, Chief Biologist Vale stared in absolute horror at the genetic sequencing data projected across his laboratory monitors. He had spent the last 48 hours running exhaustive simulations, desperately searching for a pathogenic contaminant or a targeted biological weapon. What he found was infinitely more terrifying. "This is not a pathogen," Vile whispered to his empty laboratory, his voice trembling as he highlighted a hidden strand of genetic code on the screen. "It is a command." He realized with sickening clarity that the entire ecosystem the galaxy had so eagerly borrowed from humanity contained a dormant sleeper gene. The humans had not merely planted trees and engineered algae for the benefit of their neighbors. They had masterfully woven an invisible kill switch into the very DNA of the biosphere. Every single leaf, every spore, every blade of grass sold by human hands contained an encrypted biological lock, and the humans held the only key. Vile sprinted through the corridors of the High Council spire, clutching his datapad. He burst into the war room, demanding an immediate audience with the military leadership. "We must initiate diplomatic contact immediately," Vile pleaded, projecting the genetic breakdown onto the main strategic table. "The humans are actively terminating our biosphere. They have encoded absolute control into the flora. If we do not negotiate, we will suffocate within the month." Then the generals around the table merely scoffed. Commander Kalen, now promoted to a seat on the High Council for his victory, glared at the biologist with utter disdain. "You are a coward, Vile," Kylan sneered, dismissing the holographic data with a wave of his armored hand. "You let a few dying plants cloud your judgment. We are the Vangari. We do not negotiate with dirt farmers. Let their weeds wither. We will activate our artificial atmospheric processors and synthetic nutrient synthesizers. Technology will carry our empire, not human seeds." The warning was entirely ignored, buried beneath mountains of arrogance and martial pride. Over the course of the next 15 days, that arrogance became the very instrument of their doom. The Vangari economy, built on the assumption of infinite resources, fractured and collapsed from within. The artificial processors, designed only for emergency backup, critically overheated and failed trying to filter the atmospheres of 40 densely populated worlds. Across the empire, invincible shock troops and hardened soldiers collapsed in the streets, their lungs burning as they gasped for oxygen that simply was not there. Even the mighty Vangari fleet was not spared. Microscopic plant spores, silently activated by the human command code, drifted through the ventilation shafts of the obsidian dreadnoughts. These spores were engineered to aggressively metabolize heavy metals. The pristine armor plating of the warships began to violently corrode. Weapon systems jammed, bulkheads rusted through, and engines failed as the invisible, biological rot devoured the pride of the Vangari military. They were dying, completely paralyzed, without a single shot being fired, driven to the absolute brink of total extinction by their rapidly collapsing ecosystem. The Vangari High Council convened in a darkened, suffocating chamber. The proud generals who once conquered star systems now wheezed with every agonizing breath. Realizing that their grand empire was crumbling into dust around them, they resorted to their ultimate, most terrifying failsafe. Deep within their capital world, locked behind miles of shielding, lay the Tomb Maker. It was a star-killing superweapon of apocalyptic proportions, a horrific engine of destruction powered by a captive singularity, fully capable of collapsing a main-sequence sun in upon itself. Driven by blind panic, the Council targeted the weapon directly at Earth. They intended to hold the human homeworld hostage, threatening to incinerate their entire solar system unless the biological embargo was immediately reversed. With a final, trembling command, the firing sequence initiated. The Vangari capital planet shuddered violently beneath their feet. A monstrous beam of crimson energy erupted, violently tearing open the fabric of space itself. It traveled at speeds defying comprehension, a cosmic spear screaming across the dark void. The Vangari elite watched their telemetry screens with bated breath, waiting for Earth to burn into radioactive cinders. The apocalyptic beam reached the very edge of the Sol system, striking the outer boundary where the sun's influence faded. But the devastating impact never came. There was no shattered star and no planetary disintegration. Instead, as the beam breached the perimeter, an unimaginable structure flared to life. A colossal, invisible mycelium network. An intricate web of cosmic fungus spanning across the entire solar system and blanketing all 9 planets. Suddenly illuminated the darkness. It was a biological shield of staggering proportions, composed of trillions of bioluminescent threads that gleamed brightly, like spun starlight against the black canvas of space. The crimson beam slammed into the fungal web and was instantly, effortlessly halted. The Vangari sensor operators watched in unadulterated terror as the apocalyptic energy of the Tomb Maker was fluidly absorbed by it. The terrifying energy of a star killer was bent, refracted, and greedily consumed by the glowing threads. The mycelium pulsed with profound, newfound vitality, drinking the destructive force like a gentle summer rain. The ultimate weapon of the Vangari Empire had been neutralized by cosmic mold. Before the High Council could even comprehend the mathematical impossibility of what they had just witnessed, every single monitor, holographic projector, and communication array across the entire crumbling empire forcibly rebooted. The harsh, red glow of their military interfaces vanished entirely, replaced by a clear, pristine visual broadcast. Sitting at a modest metal desk was Xenoflora engineer Cashbogs. He looked completely unbothered, gazing directly into the camera lens with that same chilling, half-formed smile of profound pity he wore on Eden 9. "You looked at us and saw only weak gardeners," Cash spoke softly, his voice echoing loudly through the silent, dying halls of the Vangari command centers. "You believed we traveled the stars simply to plant seeds, harvest crops, and provide food for those you deemed stronger. You were incredibly, fatally wrong. We did not spend 100 years terraforming the galaxy just to grow food. We were weaving an immune system. We built a biological defense network on a galactic scale, specifically designed to protect the fragile balance of life from aggressive, parasitic infections." He paused, letting his heavy words sink deep into the minds of the horrified conquerors. "Infections exactly like you." Cash leaned forward, his eyes devoid of malice, projecting only cold, terrifying logic. "That superweapon you just fired? It was a very impressive display of raw kinetic power, but it was completely useless against the network. In fact, we want to formally thank you for it. A network of that unfathomable size requires an immense amount of energy to activate its secondary defensive functions. The energy you just provided was immediately converted into biological fuel by the mycelium, and we have cleverly routed that sustenance directly back to the spores currently devouring your armada." As he spoke those exact words, catastrophic proximity alarms began blaring across every remaining Vangari military outpost. In the cold void of space, the mighty obsidian dreadnoughts were suddenly, violently engulfed, nourished by the sheer, ungodly energy of the Tomb Maker, transferred instantly through the quantum biological web. The dormant plant life erupting from the ships underwent a terrifying hyper-evolution. Massive, unbreakable green vines, thick as titanium cables, violently burst through the heavy hull plates. Gigantic fungal blooms erupted furiously from the engine bays, glowing with the absorbed crimson energy. Within minutes, the entirety of the fearsome Vangari fleet was completely swallowed whole, tightly bound and permanently locked inside colossal, impenetrable plant cocoons. The greatest military force the galaxy had ever known was completely paralyzed without humanity firing a single bullet. Down on the surface of the Vangari core worlds, the situation rapidly descended into absolute chaos. The military was completely incapacitated, locked away in their floating orbital tombs, left with absolutely no defense, and unable to endure another agonizing moment of suffocating hunger and highly toxic air. The heavily oppressed civilian populace finally broke. Millions of starving, desperate Vangari citizens surged aggressively through the capital streets, tearing down the metal barricades and violently overthrowing the paralyzed, gasping High Council. The mighty, ancient government shattered overnight, consumed by its own people. Across the wider galaxy, a terrified silence took hold. Dozens of neutral species, planetary governments, and independent galactic empires watched the intercepted broadcasts in a state of sheer, paralyzing shock. They watched the most brutal, unstoppable empire in galactic history completely dissolve into utter ruin and planetary starvation in less than 1 month. They realized, with a collective, terrifying shiver of primal fear, that the humans were not harmless farmers. They were the undisputed apex predators of the universe, quietly holding the leash of existence itself. Exactly 1 week after the unconditional capitulation of the Empire, a previously unseen human fleet drifted into the Vangari systems. It bore no military insignia, known only in secure channels as the Greenwood Armada. They did not tear through reality with the deafening roar of conquerors, nor did they cast the terrifying shadows of dreadnoughts. Instead, these massive, elegant vessels, shaped like colossal teardrops of white ceramic and living wood, slipped gently through the toxic, ash-choked clouds of the dying planets. Instead of deploying armored drop pods or initiating plasma bombardments, the giant ships opened their immense ventral bays to the skies below. A shimmering, iridescent mist began to fall across the desolate continents. It was a torrential, gentle rain of highly specialized biological enzymes. The moment these microscopic, glowing droplets touched the heavily polluted atmosphere, a miracle of science unfolded. The toxic haze began to visibly dissolve. The shattered ozone layer knit itself back together with astonishing rapid precision. The suffocating smog bonded with the falling enzymes, turning into heavy, clean water that washed the thick soot away from the crumbling alien architecture. Cashbogs personally descended to the ruined surface of the Vangari capital, walking completely unarmed and without a hazard suit among the devastated, desperate populace. He knelt quietly in the barren, acidic soil. Around him, millions of starving, gasping refugees watched in absolute, paralyzing bewilderment. Carefully, Cash placed fresh, dormant seeds into the softened dirt. Through a translation collar, he patiently guided the trembling, clawed hands of the fallen warriors, demonstrating the exact pressure and care required to nurture a fragile sprout. He was teaching the galaxy's most ruthless conquerors the quiet, forgotten art of cultivation. A profound, world-shattering astonishment enveloped the Vangari. They were witnessing the very species they had mercilessly slaughtered on Eden 9, now painstakingly resurrecting their dying homeworlds. And the humans were doing this without demanding a single political concession, without claiming a single slave, and without establishing any military occupation. Yet, the venom of imperial pride is a stubborn disease. Deep underground, beneath the recovering capital, a splinter group of radical military remnants breached the primary planetary core reactor. Unwilling to accept the utter humiliation of human charity, they initiated a catastrophic thermal meltdown sequence, intending to shatter the planet entirely and take their benevolent saviors into the void with them. Up on the surface, Cash felt the unnatural, violent tremor echoing through the tectonic plates. He did not panic. He did not signal the fleet for a surgical orbital strike, nor did he draw a sidearm. He merely closed his eyes, knelt, and pressed his bare palm firmly against the damp earth. Miles below the surface, colossal, ancient roots the size of skyscrapers violently awoke from their slumber. They surged effortlessly through the dense, subterranean bedrock, bursting into the steel reactor chamber. The massive wooden tendrils wrapped tightly around the glowing fusion core, effortlessly crushing the detonation mechanisms and safely absorbing the lethal radiation into their thick bark. Simultaneously, smaller, lightning-fast roots coiled tightly around the extremist soldiers. They stripped away the alien weapons and wove an impenetrable, living cage around the radicals, permanently sealing them within an eternal, breathing ecological prison. A former Vangari general, standing beside Cash and witnessing this display of quiet, godlike power, collapsed to his knees, his massive frame trembling uncontrollably in the mud. Cash walked over to the broken warlord, his expression an unreadable mask of profound, ancient sorrow. "We forgive you," Cash said softly, looking down at the weeping alien. "We forgive you, because we once destroyed our own Earth, exactly 10,000 years ago. We know the blinding darkness of arrogance. But understand this carefully. Our greatest cruelty is not your extinction. It is forcing you to live, to breathe this clean air, and to witness the unbearable weight of your own sins." The reconstruction efforts across the shattered territories were proceeding with an eerie, quiet efficiency. The ash-choked skies of the capital were slowly transitioning into a vibrant, breathable azure, and the once barren, acidic soil now teemed with fragile green shoots, up in the high orbit above the recovering world. Cashbog stood completely alone within the primary command center of his ecological observation station, silently monitoring the vast, flowing data streams. The tranquility of the moment was profound, a testament to the healing power of nature. Then, that delicate peace was violently, permanently shattered. A deep, bone-rattling alarm echoed through the metallic corridors of the station. It was a highly classified frequency, a warning siren that Cash had desperately prayed he would never have to hear in his lifetime. It was not a localized distress beacon, nor was it a military proximity alert from a rogue faction. It was a terrifying, rhythmic pulse originating from the absolute freezing edge of the known universe, a desolate, starless expanse classified simply as the Dark Rim. The telemetry data flooding the main holographic screens was entirely chaotic, painting a picture of sheer cosmic impossibility. Entire, densely populated star systems on the galactic frontier were simply winking out of existence in the blink of an eye. Cash frantically isolated the incoming deep space data, his fingers flying across the glowing interface with practiced desperation. A cold, paralyzing dread settled deep into his marrow as the horrific, undeniable truth materialized on the displays. This was the ultimate, devastating consequence of the Vangari invasion. When the arrogant commander had ordered the plasma bombardment of the World Tree on Eden 9, he had not merely destroyed a beautiful planetary ecosystem. He had struck a critical load-bearing pillar of the universe. The World Tree was the central biological anchor point of a colossal, invisible structure known as the biological isolation membrane. For countless centuries, humanity had secretly and painstakingly maintained this immense energetic shield, a carefully woven cosmic tapestry designed to absorb and mask the quantum signature of all life within the Milky Way. The Vangari had unwittingly punctured that protective shell. The vibrant, pulsating scent of billions of inhabited worlds was now bleeding out into the great, dark ocean of the intergalactic void, like blood in water. through that microscopic fracture in the membrane. An ancient, incomprehensible terror had caught the scent. The void swarm was arriving. They were not a rival empire, nor were they a mechanical fleet of warships. They were an unfathomable, parasitic entity, composed of pure, ravenous dark energy and hyper-evolved biological matter, hailing from a dead, consumed galaxy. They were cosmic locusts of unimaginable, godlike proportions, entities that gorged themselves on the burning cores of main-sequence stars and stripped the life force from entire solar systems in a matter of fleeting hours. The sheer, terrifying scale of the approaching mass defied all logical comprehension. It was a rolling, writhing storm of absolute, crushing darkness that swallowed light itself, leaving nothing but freezing, empty void in its wake. An emergency galactic summit was instantly convened, pulling the panicked leaders of hundreds of sovereign species into a unified, highly secure holographic chamber. Raw, unadulterated terror swept through the alien representatives as Cash bypassed their security protocols and broadcasted the deep space satellite feeds directly into their chambers. They watched in paralyzing, breathless horror as the outer rim colonies were systematically shredded. The swarm moved with terrifying, impossible velocity, devouring celestial bodies at the speed of light. The true, terrifying meaning behind the oldest, most sacred rule in the galaxy finally dawned upon the trembling council members. The universal decree, "Do not mess with humans," was never established to protect the rest of the galaxy from human military aggression. It was a desperate, silent plea to leave the cosmic infrastructure entirely intact. Humanity had not been hoarding fertile agricultural worlds or building silent empires of dirt. They were the solitary gatekeepers, standing a lonely, exhausted vigil in the dark, desperately holding the door shut against a nightmare that would consume them all. The galaxy had thought humanity was hiding. In reality, humanity was hiding the galaxy. The council chamber erupted into sheer, chaotic bedlam. Proud alien monarchs and stoic planetary governors fell to their knees, openly weeping as they watched the relentless swarm tear through the outer defense grids as easily as wet paper. Representative after representative turned their terrified, pleading eyes toward the human delegation on the screens. They begged, their voices cracking with absolute, pathetic despair, offering entire sectors, unimaginable wealth, and eternal servitude if humanity could just somehow stop the impending apocalypse. Cash Boggs stood perfectly motionless at the center of the transmission, bathed in the harsh red light of the tactical readouts. The main screen behind him was entirely black, saturated completely by the approaching mass of the swarm. The gentle, compassionate engineer who had patiently knelt in the dirt to teach defeated soldiers how to plant seeds was entirely gone. His posture was rigid, his jaw set like carved granite. He stared directly into the terrifying abyss of the radar, his eyes reflecting a cold, absolute, and predatory resolve. When he finally spoke, his voice was a razor-sharp whisper that sliced effortlessly through the frantic weeping of the Galactic Council. "You have all misunderstood our place in this universe," Cash stated, his tone completely devoid of any warmth or mercy. "We have never been your gardeners. We are hunters." The Void Swarm did not merely move through the vacuum of space. It violently consumed the very fabric of reality itself, a colossal, roiling hurricane of absolute, crushing blackness. It tore toward the galactic center with a ravenous hunger that defied all logical comprehension. Main sequence stars flickered and died instantly in its catastrophic path, their billion-year lifespans snuffed out in mere seconds, leaving behind only freezing, dead nebulas. In a desperate, unified front, the remaining armadas of 100 different sovereign species aligned their heavily armed cruisers and massive dreadnoughts. They unleashed a relentless, deafening torrent of highly concentrated plasma fire, a dazzling, blinding barrage of thermal destruction that could have effortlessly shattered entire moons into dust. But against the unimaginable scale of the swarm, it was utterly meaningless. The blinding lances of superheated plasma were simply swallowed entirely by the crushing darkness, extinguished instantly, like tiny, insignificant sparks thrown into a raging, bottomless ocean. The Allied fleets began to physically break apart, their titanium structural integrities failing catastrophically as the intense gravitational anomalies generated by the parasitic mass crushed their hulls like fragile eggshells. Raw, absolute panic echoed frantically across the combined communication channels as the cosmic locusts prepared to devour the beating heart of the galactic core. At the exact epicenter of this unfolding, universe-ending apocalypse, Cash Boggs stood with unyielding, terrifying resolve on the command deck of the human ecological flagship, the Yggdrasil. The vessel was a staggering, awe-inspiring marvel of bioengineering, a gargantuan craft meticulously woven from living, breathing ironwood and heavily armored with impenetrable, diamond-scaled bark, watching the alien fleets crumbling into flaming wreckage. Cash raised his gloved hand and slammed it down forcefully onto the primary biological command console. "Initiate the harvest protocol," Cash commanded, his voice a steady thunderclap echoing loudly through the tense command center. The order did not travel through standard, slow radio frequencies. Instead, it was injected directly into the hyperspatial mycelium network, racing across the vast galaxy at speeds that completely shattered the known laws of physics. Instantly, thousands upon thousands of planets that humanity had painstakingly terraformed over the past 10 centuries responded to the master code. From the lush, vibrant valleys of the human core worlds to the recently resurrected breathing soils of the Vangari territories, the ground violently cracked open. Enormous, subterranean crystalline biological arrays, buried deep beneath the planetary crusts for generations, activated simultaneously. Every single human-cultivated planet violently discharged a colossal, roaring pillar of pure, concentrated photosynthetic energy straight up into the dark cosmos. These blinding beams of emerald and gold light shot through the infinite darkness, interlacing and weaving intricately together across thousands of light years. In a matter of breathtaking moments, they formed an impossibly massive, radiant net of blinding light, tightly enmeshing the entire Milky Way in a protective, glowing, and unbreakable embrace. The sheer, overwhelming luminous force of the planetary grid temporarily blinded the sensory receptors of the swarm, causing the massive entity to writhe and thrash in unimaginable cosmic agony. This was the exact, fleeting opening humanity desperately needed. "Take us directly into the eye of the storm," Cash ordered the helmsman, his cold eyes locked firmly onto the swirling, chaotic epicenter of the parasitic mass. "Engage maximum biological thrust. Do not stop until we are deeply buried in its belly." The Yggdrasil surged violently forward. Its colossal organic thrusters flared with blinding, searing blue fusion fire, propelling the living dreadnought directly into the crushing, chaotic maw of the void swarm. Horrific, shadowy tendrils whipped aggressively against the diamond bark hull, screaming loudly with the compressed, agonizing voices of a trillion consumed souls. The flagship violently shuddered, its outer protective layers tearing away as it aggressively bored deeper and deeper into the absolute, suffocating darkness. The external observation cameras fed back nothing but pure black. The sheer, impossible density of the dark energy threatening constantly to crush the mighty ship into a microscopic singularity. Yet, the Yggdrasil held firmly together, driven by the unbreakable will of its stoic commander and the resilient, flawless engineering of a species that simply refused to die. They pierced the thickest outer membranes, tearing violently through the shadowy, necrotic tissue until they forcefully breached the absolute dead center of the cosmic parasite. "We have reached the core!" the navigation officer shouted frantically over the deafening, metallic roar of the tearing hull. Cash did not hesitate for a fraction of a second. He shattered the protective glass casing over the payload release mechanism with his fist. "Deploy the apex strain." From the heavily shielded ventral bays of the Yggdrasil, a payload unlike any other weapon in galactic history was forcefully ejected into the swirling dark energy matrix. It was not a nuclear bomb or a kinetic kill vehicle, but the ultimate, devastating ecological virus. It was an artificially engineered apex biological organism, specifically designed to aggressively metabolize and endlessly consume dark energy. The very moment the microscopic virus made contact with the inner core of the swarm, it instantly reacted with the interlaced network of photosynthetic light currently piercing the massive entity from the outside. The resulting biochemical reaction was utterly staggering. A blinding shockwave of pure, crystalline purification violently erupted outward from the hull of the Yggdrasil. The virus aggressively bonded with the dark matter, rapidly calcifying the writhing shadows into solid form, moving at exponential, terrifying speeds. The reaction violently ripped through the entire, unimaginable mass of the void swarm. In mere seconds, the incomprehensible, galaxy-eating horror was completely paralyzed, fossilized instantly from the inside out by an unstoppable, roaring wave of biological crystallization. The violent, churning darkness solidified instantly. The roaring cosmic tempest was suddenly and miraculously replaced by a profound, breathtaking silence, where the terrifying, all-consuming entity once loomed, an immense, unimaginably beautiful belt of glowing, solid crystal now spanned the entire outer edge of the galaxy. It shimmered brightly, with captured, ancient starlight, acting as a permanent, impenetrable, and radiant shield against any future threats emerging from the intergalactic void. The allied alien fleets, battered, broken, and utterly exhausted, floated quietly in the silent vacuum, staring in absolute religious awe at the magnificent, crystalline monument. The entire universe fell into a state of deep, reverent worship, finally understanding the true, terrifying, and majestic power of the gatekeepers. Slowly, the heavily scarred but fully operational Yggdrasil drifted quietly out of the shattered crystalline remains. On the pristine observation deck, Cash Boggs stood silently before the massive viewport. The warm emerald light of the new cosmic barrier washed over his tired, hardened face. He reached out calmly, gently, picking up a ceramic mug from his command console, took a slow, deliberate sip of hot black coffee, and quietly tapped the screen to close the mission file. The galaxy had finally learned exactly what true respect meant. Hello again, dear listeners. And thank you so much from the bottom of my heart for joining us on this grand journey today. I would love to know exactly where you are tuning in from. So please let me know your city or country in the comments below. As a gentle reminder, if you found today's story thrilling and want to help us keep this channel alive, we humbly ask for your support. Just $1 makes a massive difference for us. Your generous contribution allows us to pay our incredibly hardworking staff, helping them put food on the table and support their families during these tough times, ensuring we can continue to create and share these amazing stories with you. You can easily support us by scanning the QR code right here on the screen, or by using the secure donation link provided in the description box and pinned comment. Thank you for keeping the spirit of storytelling alive.